She was cast into the void by the very blood that birthed her, but she returned carrying a child who could erase entire worlds with a thought. The citadel of the Archean Dominion shimmered like a living jewel suspended in the endless night of space. Its spires caught the light of 3 suns and scattered it into colors no mortal painter could capture. Every wall, every hall, every polished step was a reminder of centuries of rule and the unbroken line of sovereigns who had carried the throne of suns. And at the heart of this shining empire walked Princess Lyris. From the moment of her first breath, she had been raised to believe the throne was her destiny. The people spoke her name with pride, and the court watched her with the calculating eyes of those who weighed the worth of a crown not by its gold, but by its bearer. She mastered the arts of diplomacy and war. She memorized the histories of the Dominion and the Old Star treaties. She learned to smile when others plotted and to strike when others hesitated. For all the whispers of the court, there had been no doubt in her mind that she would ascend. But destiny has a way of turning to ash in a mouth. The eclipse trials came once in a ruler's lifetime, a ritual older than the Dominion itself. The 3 suns would align and cast their shadows across the throne world. In that darkness, the royal seers would look beyond the veil of sight and measure the truth of the heir's blood. It was said that in the shadow of the eclipse, no lie could stand. The day arrived, and the people gathered in the plazas, their voices a rising sea of expectation. Lyris entered the Hall of Oracles, clothed in white as tradition demanded. The walls glimmered with crystal veins pulsing with starlight. At the center, the circle of seers awaited, robed in deep midnight. Their faces were hidden, their hands held over the fire that burned without fuel. She stepped forward, her heart steady, her gaze unshaken. The High Seer spoke words in a language older than any known world. The flames turned from white to blue to black. A silence fell, so heavy it seemed the air itself stopped moving. The seers began to murmur, their voices low and uncertain. Then the High Seer's tone broke into something colder. "Painted," he said. The word seemed to echo through her bones. "The void seed runs in your blood." Gasps rang through the chamber. Lyris felt the weight of the words before she understood them. The void seed was a curse from the ancient wars, a fragment of darkness that lived not in shadow, but in the marrow of living things. It was said those who carried it would one day awaken the hunger for destruction and consume not only worlds, but the light between them. She stood unmoving as the seers finished their reading, her mind racing not with fear, but with questions. No one in her line had ever been marked. Her lineage was guarded as fiercely as the throne itself. Yet here, in the heart of the trials, her future was being dismantled before the eyes of the court. When she left the hall, the plaza that had cheered her arrival now stared in silence. Her council convened before the eclipse had even ended. The chamber was cold and full of faces that had once smiled at her victories. Now they looked at her as though she were already dead. The vote for her exile was near unanimous. They did not dare kill her outright. The curse was feared, but so was the wrath of the ancient laws. Instead, they stripped her of her titles and her place. Her banners were burned from the palace walls. Her name was struck from the records of succession. On the day of her exile, the skies above the capital turned crimson with the dying light of the eclipse. The streets were lined with those who had once sworn loyalty to her house. Some turned away. Others spat at the ground as she passed. Yet there were a few who could not meet her eyes. Fear was the true ruler of the Dominion that day, and it ruled with perfect obedience. At the edge of the launch docks, the ships waited, cold metal beasts that would carry her into the bleak void, the place where the Dominion sent those it wished to forget. As the guards escorted her to the waiting vessel, a cloaked figure stepped from the shadows. In their hand gleamed a silver shard, etched with symbols that writhed when she looked too long. Their voice was a whisper meant only for her. "When the stars turn red, you will understand." Before she could speak, they were gone, swallowed by the crowd and the cold. The ship's hold was silent as it left the docks. Through the narrow viewing slit, She saw the citadel shrink into the distance, its spires catching the last light of the suns. She thought of her training, her years of devotion, the countless acts of service. And she thought of the council's faces, hardened by fear and pride. They had cast her out not because she was dangerous, but because they feared the truth of what they did not understand. She closed her eyes and felt the shard in her palm, its surface warm as though it carried a heartbeat. The hum of the ship became the only sound as it crossed the last beacon of the Dominion's border and entered the bleak void. Here, the stars were dim and far between. The dark seemed alive, shifting at the edges of vision. It was said that those who entered this place never returned. But Lyris did not intend to vanish into legend and dust. She would return, not for revenge, but for truth. For the truth was stronger than any throne and sharper than any blade. The voyage stretched into a silence that could drive lesser minds into madness. Days and nights lost their meaning. The void was not empty. It whispered. Sometimes the whispers came in voices she knew, other times in words she had never heard. The shard pulsed in her hand as if answering. She began to dream of red stars burning in patterns she could not name, of a door hidden in the darkness, and of a light beyond it that did not belong to any sun. She awoke each time with the feeling that she was moving towards something vast and inevitable. The ship's systems began to fail. Lights dimmed, engines faltered. She knew then that her journey into exile was not meant to end in the safety of a barren moon. Someone, or something, had set her on this course. And deep in her bones, where the void seed slept, she felt a stirring. When the ship finally shuddered to a stop, she looked out and saw nothing. Not the cold stars, not the glow of any nearby world. Only a single point of crimson light hanging in the darkness, the same shade as the eclipse that had marked her doom. And for the first time since the betrayal, she felt no fear. Only the sharp, clear certainty that her story had not ended. It had only just begun. The bleak void was not silent. It breathed. It shifted. It murmured in sounds that were not sounds, and in shapes that were not meant for human eyes. Lyris drifted in the crippled vessel, its dying engines pushing her deeper into a space the Dominion had long erased from maps. The stars here were distant wounds of light, swallowed by the black. Each flicker felt older than history. The silver shard in her hand warmed whenever the darkness thickened, as if recognizing the place. Food and water dwindled, yet she felt no hunger. The air in the ship should have thinned long ago, but the void itself seemed to fill her lungs with something colder. She passed wrecks that floated like corpses of forgotten empires, their hulls torn open as though some vast unseen hand had peeled them apart. Inside, she saw the frozen remains of crews from a dozen species, their eyes wide in a silence that felt heavier than death. And still she moved on. Sometimes she thought she saw shapes moving between the stars, long silhouettes that flowed like liquid shadow. They never came closer, yet she felt watched, measured, weighed. One cycle, she came upon a vast structure, half swallowed by the gravitational tide of a black hole. It hung in the void like a cathedral carved from obsidian and bone. Her ship was drawn to it, as though pulled by an unseen tether. When she stepped onto its surface, the gravity shifted to match her stride. The air was stale but breathable. Lights shimmered faintly in patterns that felt deliberate. She followed them through silent corridors until she reached a chamber the size of a city square. There, at its center, stood a monolith etched with spirals that seemed to turn as she watched. The silver shard in her palm vibrated. The spirals on the monolith shifted to form symbols, not written in any language she knew, but one she could somehow understand. It spoke of the Umbratians, a race that had lived before the first suns ignited. Masters of entropy, not destroyers, but keepers of balance between creation and decay. They had carried in their blood the void seed, a fragment of pure unmaking. Where most saw destruction, the Umbratians saw truth. Nothing could last forever. To dissolve was as sacred as to be born. The monolith showed her visions, civilizations rising and falling, worlds dissolving into dust, suns collapsing into darkness only to feed the birth of new stars. She saw a figure with eyes like hers standing at the edge of the cosmos. In their hand, the same silver shard. Around them, a choice: to dissolve the universe entirely, or to clear away its rot so life could bloom again. The voice of the Umbrations rose like the echo of 1,000 dead stars. The Void Seed is not a curse. It is a key. You are the first in an age to carry it. Through you will come either the salvation of all worlds or their end. Lyris stood in the chamber long after the vision faded. The black hole roared silently outside its walls. Her whole life, the Dominion had called her tainted, unfit, dangerous. And now, here in the grave of a civilization older than light, she learned that they were not wrong, but for reasons they could never imagine. The shard in her hand was no longer just warm. It pulsed like a heart, and deep within her own chest, she felt something answer. When she left the Umbratian ruins, the ship's systems flickered to life without her touch. The void outside no longer felt hostile. It felt alive, waiting. The paths ahead were endless, but all of them led toward the truth. And Lyris knew her exile was never meant to be her end. It was the beginning of something that would make the throne of suns tremble. The derelict warship hung in the darkness like a beast long dead. Its hull was scarred by weapons fire. Whole sections had been torn away, leaving jagged wounds that revealed only shadow within. Lyris had followed a faint distress signal across the bleak void to find it. Her own ship latched onto the wreck with a shudder. She stepped inside, her boots echoing on metal that had not felt life in decades. The air was thin and dry, smelling faintly of ash. Lights flickered weakly in the corridors. Somewhere far inside the ship, something hummed like a distant heartbeat. She moved cautiously past bulkheads warped by heat. Skeletons of soldiers floated where gravity had failed, their armor pitted and broken. Weapons lay scattered as if abandoned mid-battle. In the central hall, she found a great rift in the floor. Beyond it, the faint glow of a containment field pulsed weakly. She crossed the gap and stepped into a chamber lined with shattered stasis pods. All were empty, except one. Inside stood a man, his eyes closed, his hands resting against the transparent barrier. The light of the failing stasis field cast his skin in silver and shadow. Symbols marked his neck and wrists, the same spiral she had seen in the Umbracian monolith. As she approached, the field flickered and dissolved. His eyes opened. They were dark and deep as the void itself. Yet within them danced threads of pale light, like distant stars. He spoke her name before she could speak his. Lyris, I have been waiting. His voice was low, carrying the weight of centuries. He told her his name was Kedron, the last living hybrid of human and Umbracian blood. His mother had been a scholar from the Dominion who sought the ancient race. His father had been one of their last priests. When the wars came, his people were hunted to extinction. He had fled into the dark, waiting for the visions to come true. Kedron said he had seen her before, not in flesh, but in dreams that felt older than memory. In every vision, she stood beside a child. Sometimes the child was crowned in light, bringing peace to 1,000 worlds. Sometimes the child's shadow devoured entire galaxies. The visions never revealed which ending would be hers, only that the choice would be hers alone. The silver shard in her palm pulsed when he stepped closer. He lifted his hand to reveal its twin hanging on a chain around his neck. When they touched, the two fragments glowed, and a ripple passed through the air. For an instant, Lyris saw the ghost of another place. A great hall of black stone. Above them hung a sky of shifting stars that whispered in voices she almost understood. Then it was gone. Kedron told her the prophecy of the Umbracians was incomplete. It did not speak only of one with a void seed, but of two whose bloodlines had been severed from time itself. When joined, they would create the bearer of balance or ruin. He did not know why fate had brought them together, now only that to turn away from it would not stop the choice from coming. They explored the warship together, searching for supplies and answers. In the captain's quarters, they found records of battles fought on the edges of the void. The Dominion had been there long before they claimed. They had known of the Umbracians. They had hunted them in secret, fearing the power of the seed. The ship they stood in had been part of that purge. As days passed and the drifting wreck, Lyris felt the silence between them grow heavy with unspoken truths. Kedron carried the same loneliness. She did the same mark of exile and danger. In the stillness of the bleak void, their shared blood seemed to recognize itself. And though neither spoke of it, both understood that staying together was not a choice, but an inevitability. When they left the warship, the stars beyond seemed closer. The shard around her neck no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a pulse counting down to something neither of them could stop. And somewhere deep inside the black between worlds, the prophecy stirred, waiting for its moment to awaken. The nebula shimmered in shifting waves of violet and gold, its clouds folding in on themselves like a living dream. No charted maps marked this place, and no beacons called ships to its heart. Here, beyond the reach of patrols or trade lanes, Lyris had hidden herself, and Kedron waiting for the moment the visions had promised. The air within the small shelter they had built was heavy with silence, and the hum of old machines scavenged for forgotten wrecks. The pain began with the slow pull of tides in her bones. It grew in waves that made her grip the cold metal floor until her knuckles whitened. Kedron stood at her side, his hands steady, his gaze fixed on her, as though nothing beyond this moment existed. The silver shard around her neck burned with heat that sank into her chest. Somewhere far above, in the storm of the nebula, lightning rippled through clouds of dust, painting the sky in living fire. When Sereth came into the world, the air seemed to still. There was a moment of weightless silence before the first cry tore through the chamber. It was not loud, but it carried a resonance that struck through Lyris's bones and spilled into the air around them. The walls of the shelter shuddered. Outside, the swirling gases of the nebula twisted into a vast spiral. Stars beyond the dust blinked once, then flared brighter as though answering the sound. Far away across light years, worlds felt the ripple. Oceans heaved against their shores. Mountains groaned with sudden fractures. In deep space, gravitic sensors screamed warnings before failing altogether. Pilots spoke later of feeling the stars shift, though none could explain it. The pulse passed unseen, yet its echo lingered in the hearts of those attuned to such things. Within the Arkan Dominion, alarms blared in the high towers of the capital. The royal seers collapsed, clutching their temples, as visions struck them all at once. They saw a child wrapped in light and shadow, its eyes open with impossible knowing. They saw suns swallowed and reborn. They saw thrones crumble and rise again on the same stone. The High Council named a force that touched them in that instant: the Endbringer. Fleets were ordered to move before the vision could fade. Warships slid from their docks, their black hulls gleaming with the light of the capital's suns. Captains were told to capture the child if possible and to destroy it if not. No cost was too high, for the Dominion claimed the fate of all their worlds was at stake. In the nebula, Lyris cradled Sereth against her chest, feeling the steady beat of the tiny heart. The child's skin was warm with a faint shimmer beneath it, as though threads of light moved through the veins. Kedron watched from the shadow, his expression unreadable. The silver shard on his chest and the one she wore now glowed in unison, each beat of the newborn's heart sending another pulse through the stones. They both knew what would come next. The Dominion had felt it. Others would too. The pulse would draw hunters and seekers, prophets and killers from across the galaxy. And though Sereth's breathing was slow and calm, there was a depth in those newborn eyes that no infant should hold. It was the gaze of one who had already seen too much. Outside, the nebula shifted again. Strange silhouettes moved within its folds, great shapes that might have been ships or living things born of the gas and light. Kedron began sealing the shelter's entrance, moving with quiet precision. Lyris pressed her lips to Sereth's head, whispering words she could not recall moments later. She knew that this moment, the stillness between the birth and the storm, would be the last peace they would know for a long time. In the farthest reaches of the Dominion, a priest lit a black candle and marked the first day of the prophecy's fulfillment. In the cold corridors of warships, soldiers checked their weapons and murmured their fear of a child they had never seen. And in the heart of the nebula, the Entropy Child slept her breath in perfect rhythm with the stars. The first world they ran to was a place of broken skies and burning rivers. Lyris had chosen it because no sane fleet would waste fuel to chase prey across a battlefield that had no sides left to win. The air was choked with the ash of decades-old wars. Great rusting mechs lay half-buried in dunes of shattered glass. She carried Sereth wrapped in a cloak scavenged from a fallen soldier and kept her head down, moving only in the smoke. But even here the hunters came. Their ships descended like silent predators. The first shot never reached her. Sereth raised one small hand without thought, and the shell dissolved into a fine mist that drifted harmlessly through the air. Lyris had seen this before in whispers of moments when the child's gift stirred, but never with such clarity. The bounty guild that had taken this contract would not live long enough to report what they had witnessed. One by one, their rifles fell apart in their hands. Armor plates unraveled into threads. Even the ground beneath them turned soft until it swallowed their boots. Lyris did not wait to see the end. She took to the ruins and vanished before the bodies touched the earth. From the Warlands, she traveled to the underwater citadel of Teeth Cherwaises, where the domes gleamed in the depths like captured moons. Passage was costly and trust was scarce, but she bought both with relics taken from the wrecks she had crossed. The currents outside sang against the dome walls in long, haunting tones. Here she thought perhaps Sereth would be safe for a while. The Dominion rarely reached this far beneath the surface. But safety was a dream that dissolved as soon as the child's gift stirred again. It began when Sereth touched a dying reef. The coral was gray, brittle, and long since abandoned by life. Yet at their touch the stone dissolved and reformed as living tissue sprouting colors unseen in centuries. Fish returned to swim between the branches. The watchers in the Citadel's council chambers saw this and whispered of miracles. They also whispered of power. Within a day, the bounty guilds knew exactly where Lyris had gone. The next night, she awoke to the hum of cutting torches against the dome wall. The hunters had found her again. They fled through escape tubes that carried them to the open ocean. Lyris swam with the strength of desperation, pulling Sereth close as dark shapes followed in the waters behind. Twice she felt the pull of harpoons tear at her cloak. Once she saw Sereth's eyes flare silver and the metal tips dissolved before they could strike. The sea carried them to a half-buried wreck at the edge of a trench. There they hid while the hunters swept past their hiding place. Only when the water grew, still did she dare to rise again. Their next refuge was the shattered moon markets, a place where gravity shifted in broken pulses and merchants traded in things stolen from 100 worlds. It was said no law ruled here, but coin and secrecy. Lyris wrapped Sereth's face and walked among the stalls, never staying long in one place. The child's gift had been quiet for days, and she began to hope that perhaps the hunger was fading. That hope died when they passed a merchant who lay coughing blood into his hands. Sereth turned toward him, eyes wide, and without touching him the wounds in his lungs closed as though they had never existed. The man's gratitude was loud enough to draw attention. Within an hour, whispers spread through the markets of a child who could heal the dying. The Dominion agents moved fast. Lyris saw them before they saw her and took to the low-gravity alleys running across walls and ceilings as the pull of the moon shifted. But the hunters were many and the bounty was high. Sereth clung to her as they ran, but Lyris could feel the child's breathing change. It was not fear. It was something deeper, something that tightened their small fingers and fixed their gaze on the soldiers ahead. When they reached the barricades, Sereth did not flinch. The weapons aimed at them unraveled before they fired. The armor plates dissolved into smoke. And in the eyes of the soldiers, Lyris saw the truth. The child was not only unmaking the tools of war. They were touching the men themselves, unweaving what they were made of. Lyris pulled Sereth away before the hunger could finish its work. She ran until the shifting gravity of the moon threw her into the shadow of an abandoned spire. There she collapsed, gasping, holding the child close. The silver shards she and Kedron had carried since before the birth pulsed faintly in answer to Sereth's heartbeat. They kept moving after that, never staying anywhere more than a day. Across deserts of black glass and frozen rings where the air itself burned the lungs. Through jungles where the trees sang in voices older than history. And always the hunters followed. Some came for the bounty. Some came for the prophecy. Some came because they had seen what the child could do and wanted that power for themselves. Each time Sereth used their gift, the hunger grew. It was no longer only in battle or danger. Lyris would wake in the night to see the child's hands weaving in the air, dissolving motes of dust into nothing. Sometimes they would heal wounds without being asked. Sometimes they would erase things simply because they could. In the ruins of an old mining station, they found a moment of quiet. Lyris watched Sereth play among the broken beams, shaping fragments of metal into spirals before letting them fade into air. She wanted to believe the child could choose the light over the shadow. But the words of the Umbratians haunted her. One with this gift will birth either the world's salvation or its end. Far away in the Dominion's high towers fleets were gathering. The bounty had doubled. Alliances formed between enemies who had not spoken in centuries. The hunt was no longer about a price on a head. It was about the fear of what would happen if the child grew to their full strength. In the bleak void, a ship of black glass turned toward the path Lyris had taken. No flag marked it, no signal called ahead. Inside in the silence, a figure sat in meditation. Their eyes opened as the stars shifted. The hunt would end soon. One way or another, the Entropy child would be theirs. The Umbratian archives burned in the light of a dying star. The ancient city had been hidden in the hollow heart of an asteroid so vast it held oceans under stone. Lyris moved through the blackened halls with Sereth close behind. The flames were not fire, but the residue of entropy itself, unraveling matter molecule by molecule. Every step echoed like a heartbeat inside a tomb. She had come here seeking answers, and she had found them carved into walls older than her species. The glyphs told of the crown of stillness, a relic forged in the first war of creation. It had only one purpose: to bind the essence of one who wielded the void seed, to strip them of the hunger and the power both, to seal what they were so completely that even the stars would forget their name. The last surviving Umbratian caretaker was a figure of shadow and silver eyes. It spoke without moving its mouth, and its words were not sound but weight pressing against the mind. You know the choice, it said. Bind the child, and the galaxy lives. Let them be free, and the galaxy dies. Lyris clenched her fists until her nails cut her palms. She had crossed half the known worlds to keep Sereth safe. She had bled for them, killed for them, lived in exile for them, and now she was told the only way to save them was to destroy who they were. Sereth wandered among the broken archives, touching the stones. Each touch left a faint ripple in the air, a reminder of the power within them, a reminder of why the galaxy feared them. They looked at their mother with eyes too old for their years. Something in them already knew what was being asked. The caretaker led them to the vault of the crown. The doors were vast slabs of petrified light. When they opened, Lyris saw the relic suspended in a beam of frozen starlight. It was not metal, not stone, not anything she had words for. It was a shape the mind could not hold. Every time she blinked, it seemed different. Smaller, larger, simpler, more complex. But always she felt the same pull from it. The promise of stillness. The promise of an end. She imagined what it would mean. Sereth as an ordinary child. No more bending space with a thought. No more dissolving armies. No more hunger to unmake. They could live a quiet life somewhere beyond the edge of maps. They could be safe, but they would no longer be Sereth. Not the Sereth who had laughed at danger. Not the Sereth who had healed strangers without asking. The crown would take it all. The caretaker told her of the other choice. Leave the relic. Walk away. Let the child's power grow until it filled the galaxy. But the hunger would grow too. It always did. There had never been a bearer of the void seed who could resist forever. Eventually the hunger would swallow them, and then nothing would remain. No stars, no worlds, no life. Lyris stood in the ashes of history and felt the weight of futures pressing against her. She thought of the council who had exiled her, of Kedron whose blood had mingled with hers to bring Sereth into the world, of the knights hiding in shattered moons and drowned cities, of the hunters who had died to claim the bounty, and of the laughter of her child under alien skies. The flames of entropy moved closer to the heart of the city. The caretaker said the relic could not remain here much longer. Soon the whole asteroid would be undone and the crown with it. The choice had to be made before then. Sereth stepped toward the beam of frozen starlight. They stared at the shifting shape as if seeing an old friend. "Do you want me to wear it?" they asked. Lyris felt her throat close. She could not speak. She could not tell them the truth, that wearing it would erase them, that the child who stood before her would be gone forever, leaving only a shadow of memory. She asked instead, "Do you want to be free?" Sereth tilted their head. "I want you to be safe," they said. "I want the worlds to be safe, but I do not want to be nothing." Their voice trembled just once before becoming steady again. The caretaker waited. The relic waited. Even the flames seemed to wait. Lyris's hands shook. She saw two paths. In one, she placed the crown on her child's head, and the galaxy lived on while her heart shattered. In the other, she turned away and carried the hope that maybe, just maybe, Sereth would be the first to master the hunger. Hope was a fragile thing. It had no weight, no defense. But it was all she had carried through the years of running. A deep shudder moved through the asteroid. The vault trembled. The frozen starlight flickered. Time was almost gone. Lyris stepped closer to the relic. Sereth watched her with eyes that held no fear, only trust. Her fingers hovered above the shifting surface. It felt like touching the memory of a dream. Warm, cold, infinite. She could take it now. She could end the danger. She could break her own heart and call it mercy. Another quake shook the city. The caretaker's voice pressed harder. "Choose now." Lyris looked at Sereth, at the child who had been hunted across worlds, at the child whose birth had bent the light of stars, at the child who had already changed the galaxy without meaning to. The beam of frozen starlight dimmed. Dust fell from a ceiling in slow spirals. The flames of entropy ate at the outer doors. Lyris knew that whatever choice she made would echo for as long as the galaxy existed. She reached for the relic. The dying star burned like a wound in the sky. Its light was deep red and heavy, as if the universe itself felt the weight of what was about to happen. The asteroid that had been the Umbracian city was breaking apart in slow arcs of stone and metal. Around it, the fleets were gathering. Ships from the Arkan Dominion, from rival empires, from mercenary guilds, all converging like vultures circling a heartbeat. Lyris stood in the heart of the vault with Sereth at her side. The crown of stillness glimmered in the fading beam of frozen starlight. Her hand hovered above it, but she did not move. The caretaker's eyes were locked on her, waiting for the moment of surrender. Time was running out. The next quake would shatter the chamber. The relic would be lost forever. Sereth looked at her, and their gaze was calm. The kind of calm that comes from standing on the edge of an abyss and knowing you cannot step back. "Mother," they said, "the fleets are here. They will destroy us." Lyris could hear the distant thunder of weapons through the stone. She knew that the moment she stepped outside the vault, every gun in orbit would turn toward her child. She thought of what the crown would do. It would strip away the hunger, but also the spark. It would leave Sereth alive, but hollow. The galaxy would be safe, but the child would be gone in all but name. And in that instant she knew she could not do it. Not after everything they had endured. Not after all the choices that had brought them here. The caretaker spoke again. "If you do not bind them, the hunger will come. It always comes." Lyris turned to face the shadowed figure. "Then we will fight it," she said. "Then we will teach them to master it." The caretaker tilted its head as if seeing a path it had never considered. The asteroid shuddered again. The beam of light around the crown flickered. Lyris pulled her hand away from the relic and turned to Sereth. "You'll have to learn both sides," she said. "Creation and destruction. You cannot touch one without feeling the other." Sereth nodded. "I understand." The chamber cracked open with the force of the quake. Above them, the ceiling split to reveal the red glare of the star. Debris floated upward in the failing gravity. Lyris took Sereth's hand. "We go now," she said. They emerged into the open void on the fractured surface. The fleets had formed a ring around the asteroid. Weapons glowed, ready to fire. Voices filled the comm channels demanding surrender, demanding the Endbringer be delivered to judgment. Lyris ignored them. She looked at Sereth. The child closed their eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered with a wave of energy that was neither heat nor light. It rippled outward, touching the closest ships. Hulls dissolved into silver dust without harming the crews inside. The dust reformed into new vessels, whole and unscarred, but their weapons gone. Further out, the wave reached the crippled worlds of nearby systems. Oceans returned to dry planets. Crops sprouted in poisoned soil. The light of dying suns flared bright again. The fleets fell silent. In every ship, every soldier, every captain, every spy watched in stunned stillness. The Fear Child had unmade weapons and remade worlds in the same breath. But Lyris saw the shadow in Sereth's face. The hunger had stirred, not in rage, but in longing. Creation had tempered it for now, but she could feel it waiting, watching, testing the limits. She tightened her grip on her child's hand. The caretaker's voice whispered in her mind, even across the void. You have delayed the end. You have not erased it. One day the hunger will rise again. And on that day the choice may not be yours. Lyris looked at the fleets, pulling back their formations, breaking apart under silent orders. The galaxy had been given a reprieve. How long it would last, she could not know. But for now, Sereth had proven that power did not have to destroy. That the same force feared as the end could also be the beginning. They left the asteroid as it crumbled into dust behind them. The dying star burned brighter for a moment, then dimmed to a pale ember. Somewhere in the dark beyond the rim of known space, whispers began. The Endbringer had spared the galaxy this time. But next time, no one could say. And as their ship slipped into the shadow of the void, Lyris wondered if she had saved the worlds today or only postponed their doom.